All right. Welcome, everyone. Happy Saturday. Thank you all for joining us for session 3 of Youth Advocacy Training for Ocean and Climate Action. We're so excited for the third session. I can't believe we're already halfway through and really excited to just keep the conversation going. So as we are waiting for more folks to join us, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Give us your name, your age, where you're from, and then we'll get started in just a few minutes. We have Brazil, Tanzania, Colombia. Wonderful. And of course, Sean from the US. We have Chloe from California. Japan. It's so wonderful to see so many people from so many different parts of the world. I really appreciate, again, you guys joining us, even if it's really late where you are, really early in the morning. I know the time differences are tricky for some folks, but we really appreciate you guys joining us. Again, we'll get started in just 1 minute here. We have Sri Lanka, Italy, France, Portugal, UK, Ghana. Oh my goodness, that's so amazing. It's just incredible to see what a diversity of attendees that we have for this program. It just makes me really excited. So wonderful to see you guys again. I hope you've enjoyed the program thus far. So yeah, now we're gonna get started with session 3. So first things first, if you are joining us for the first time, if you missed session 1 or 2, those recordings are available on the World Ocean Day YouTube channel. And this session will be also available on the World Ocean Day YouTube channel shortly after the session is finished. So be sure to catch up on anything that you missed. And yeah, our agenda for today is pretty much the same as it has been for sessions 1 and 2. Just a little bit of a welcome. I'm going to introduce our wonderful panel speaker today, have a little discussion. There will be time for a Q&A at the end, and then just a couple of quick announcements at the end. So on the note of the Q&A, again, as always, feel free to submit questions that you have in the chat or use that Q&A feature at any point throughout the session. So if you do come up with a question while we're having our discussion, again, feel free to just put whatever questions you have in the chat or the Q&A. So, I don't know why Sean's profile picture is not loading. But that's okay. You can still see him on the panel. Sean Russell is our wonderful speaker today. He's the Director of Youth Engagement for Earth Echo International. I've known him for almost a decade, I think, which is really wild to think about. And we're really lucky to have him here today. He's a wonderful conservation person, expert, and just loves working with young people. So Sean, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Laura, and thanks so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to join you all today. So thrilled to have a chance to be part of this session and conversation, and just echoing the comments. Love seeing where everyone is coming in and joining us from around the world today. Just excited for this conversation and to talk about how we can work together to build impactful events and talk through fundraising strategies to bring to life your conservation goals and work. As Laura mentioned, my name is Sean Russell. I'm the Director of Youth Engagement at Earth Echo International. And for those who may not know, Earth Echo is a nonprofit that was founded almost 20 years ago now by Philippe and Alexandra Cousteau, the grandchildren of ocean explorer Jacques Cousteau. And our work is really built on a mission of building a global youth movement to protect and restore our ocean planet. So all of our programs are designed to build the capacity of young ocean advocates directly. And then we also have programs that support the teachers, the educators, the adult mentors that work with young leaders around the world. And building on that work and conversation, just really thrilled to dive into our panel today and chat more about event planning in the space, how that can help support your conservation goals as young ocean advocates, and excited for our discussion. So please I love the chats blowing up, keep the comments, questions coming. Really thrilled to see how we can cater this conversation to your needs, your goals, and the work you're doing in your community. So thanks again, Laura, for having me.
Yeah, of course. The other thing I want to add about Sean's experience is that he also founded a group called the Youth Ocean Conservation Summit. So he knows what it means to plan an event and go through all of the crazy logistics that it takes to put something like that together. So on that note, Sean, our first question, what are some of the experiences that you've had when you think about your journey through event planning and fundraising? Has anything that you've gone through kind of shaped your ideas? Do you have any specific ideas, so specific examples of past experiences that has worked really well? And, if you were going back a couple years ago as a youth advocate, fresh eyes, had never really done an event planning before, what are some things that you may tweak to make it a little bit better if you were recreating some of
Yeah.
that again today?
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. And you teed that up perfectly with kind of my background and stories. It's interesting, I think, and I know we'll get into this a little bit more with some of the other questions, but I think events are such an impactful strategy when it comes to achieving some of our conservation goals. And so we'll get deeper into what that means in a moment. But for me, it's something I really enjoy. I'll start there. I enjoy planning events and kind of organizing it. And at its core, it's about bringing people together. And that's something that I always really appreciate about events. And so for me personally, my first experiences with event planning came really in high school. Initially, I was heavily involved in the Florida 4-H program, which is a youth organization that's nationwide and international as well. But it was something that I participated in my home state of Florida in the United States. And it gave me a chance to start by planning, local community events for my peers. Some of those were conservation-focused events like coastal cleanups and restoration projects. Others were like, again, more kind of workshops and trainings for my peers. And those early experiences, kind of a smaller group events, kind of sparked my interest in this space initially. And then in particular, I remember one opportunity I had in high school through the Florida 4-H program was to plan and organize an event to bring young people to our state capitol to highlight the work they were doing in the program and the impact they were having in our community. And it became this really interesting opportunity where we took what was typically maybe a little bit of an event that wasn't as heavily attended. It was during a weekday, it was during the school year. And we had a team of young people come together and plan this kind of incredible iteration of it that put together a more focused program and agenda. I was able to write some grants and get funding to get buses to help young people get there in person. And we added a lot more structure to the event. And it was amazing to see in that first year, we grew participation by 400%. We had over 500 young people come into this event, not only to learn about the importance of advocacy and how their government works, but also to raise their voice for the cool work they were doing in their community. And I think that was a really pivotal moment for me that showed me the power that events can have if you go put the work in and go through that planning process. And then as Laura mentioned, that kind of led to the work that I continued in college. I started an event called the Youth Ocean Conservation Summit, which is an annual program that trains young people how to launch their own ocean conservation projects and gives them the tools and funding and resources to make those projects happen. And that was something that I kind of started from scratch as a college student and continues to this day, driven by amazing young people who've brought that event to their communities all across the country. And of course, now I get to bring those experiences and that work into my current job and work at Earth Echo International. And so often events are one of the strategies we use to bring young people together and again build their capacity and support their conservation work. And for me, I think out of kind of those different stages of my life and event planning, I think one of the things that's really stood out across that is really the power of partnerships and collaboration, particularly starting events as a young person. I remember starting the Youth Ocean Conservation Summit back in 2011, and it was really an idea in my head initially, an idea on a kind of one-pager piece of paper. And I had to go out and seek at least a few partners initially to buy into that idea and to support that idea. And so initially for me, that was Moat Marine Laboratory, the incredible partners that have been part of that program for years with me. It was a place I was involved in through their high school internship program and their education programs. And it really only took a couple of those early partners to kind of get the ball rolling, get some support for the event, to get it off the ground. And then once it was kind of rolling and going and moving forward, it's kind of had the snowball effect of continuing to get other community organizations and partners and young people interested. And so I think as we talk through, goals for your events, as we talk through, what are you hoping to achieve from these events that you may be planning, thinking about those just few, maybe it's 2 or 3 early partners that can come on board, that can offer their guidance or support, in the case of the Youth Ocean Conservation Summits, it was also space to hold an event at their facility. It was support with some of the registration and things like that. Having that buy-in from a few early partners was really critical to the success, and that continues to be a theme in all the event planning that I do in my day-to-day work as well. And then I think for things I would do differently, I think just really thinking through early on how to build a team around you for this event. I think sometimes, when I was a younger person working on events, I saw them maybe as a one-time thing or something we would try and see how it goes. And it was really exciting to see the success of some of these programs, and then to think, oh, now I need some more people to come on board and help and kind of build that team around the event. So the earlier you can think about, who in your community, not just the partners, but other young people, your peers who can help support you in this journey is really critical as well.
Yeah, Sean, I really appreciate that. And I mean, everything that you touched on kind of is something that we'll discuss in a little bit further down with the other questions. And yeah, I mean, I myself am alumni of the Youth Ocean Conservation Summit program. So I know what a wonderful job you and your team have done firsthand with all of this. So this next question here is kind of what you were saying about formulating the purpose and the goals of the
Yeah.
event. Like, what is the purpose? So, when you're deciding to host an event, you want to make sure that the goals and everything are aligned with your overall mission as an organization. If you are working as a part of an organization, sometimes young people are working independently, but again, as Sean mentioned, partnerships are really, really important. So you want to make sure that everything is aligned with the needs of the mission. So how do you kind of go about doing that? Like, what are the factors that determine what your overall message is for an event?
Yeah, I think that's a great question and a really important distinction in event planning, I think, too. Sometimes we get really excited about the events and think about the goal of planning an event, but I would take a step back and think about events as a strategy or a tactic to achieve your ultimate goal. So an event may not be the right way to accomplish your mission or your cause or champion your cause, whatever that looks like in your community, but it also may be the perfect way to do that. And I think that's where, the goal doesn't necessarily need to be, my goal is to plan an event or host an event. I think the goal is thinking about, what are you hoping to achieve in the big picture? And I can give you, these are just maybe more hypothetical examples, but say your goal is to register people to vote with the ocean and climate in mind. An event, a voter registration drive on your college campus may be the strategy to bring that to life. Say you're looking to capture feedback to share with government officials about creating a marine protected area in your community. Maybe a community forum that lets people, kind of speak their opinions and share their perspectives with government officials might be an event strategy. So I think it's helpful to take a step back and maybe set events aside for just a second and think about what is that big picture conservation or environmental or community goal you're working toward. And then, is an event the right strategy? And then if it is, what type of event do you need to host? And that can get, I know we're going to get, deeper into kind of how to build that event out and how does it connect to the goals. But I think starting, like you said, with those organizational or community goals is really critical, because then everything else kind of falls into place under that. You can think about who your audience is. You can think about what's the event format you need, and all of those other pieces too. So I think, yeah, kind of centering in your mission is really critical to then shape the type of event you need.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that you kind of touched on messaging as well. Obviously, session 2 was social media and communications. We talked a lot about messaging, but, in terms of an event itself, because when you're talking about, last session, we were talking about social media specifically, we could be promoting an event, but we could also be doing educational campaigns and outreach stuff. So when it comes to an event specifically, what role does storytelling play in engaging the community and trying to build that, awareness, empathy, or, call to action for the cause that you've, decided your event is going to be centered on?
Yeah, I love that. I think in so much of our work at Earth Echo is centered in this legacy of storytelling. And I think that's so exciting to think about how you weave that throughout this work. And so for me, I think a couple of things. Obviously, Laura, like we need to promote events, we need to put them out in the community. But I think as you build out the activities or the program for an event, you can really think about, especially with if it's an event that has speakers or presentations or workshops, you can think about how storytelling um, can be woven in to really engage your event participants. And so I think, say you're hosting a rally in your community to build momentum for ocean climate action. How can your speakers tell stories of some of maybe the firsthand impacts they're seeing of the climate crisis, but also how they've done work in their community that's really inspiring or impactful. So maybe, can you have young people on a stage speaking about their work, planting mangroves or restoring coastal habitats that are helping to address these issues. So for me, I think it's those stories through your event content, the speakers, the program can really help motivate the participants of the event to take further action and to get more involved. I also think there's an opportunity for storytelling around the event itself, and a way to use events to build wider engagement in the community. So for instance, we've worked with some incredible young people at Earth Echo who've led campaigns supporting marine protected areas, and some of them have done, they've installed murals at their local elementary schools. They've helped create art exhibits at a local museum highlighting the importance of ocean protection. And those actions, those events, whether it was the mural unveiling or a community event at a museum, they reach a certain audience. They reach the people who are coming to those events. But those folks were also really smart in that they used social media, they used the local newspaper to feature the stories of those events to reach a wider audience and reach even more people. And so I think often in this work, the stories of young people doing impactful things sometimes don't always get the attention they deserve. And so thinking early on about how you can get some additional traction from your event by sharing it with a local newspaper or on social media and kind of give it a little additional life beyond the core audience it reaches directly is really exciting to think about as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think when we talk about what it takes to plan an event, again, we're going to talk about that in just a minute. You know, starting with your end goal and kind of working backwards in everything that you do, including storytelling, is really important. So, one of the things that you touched on, Sean, was like, yeah, promoting the event, but also telling the story of the event. There's the beginning, like before the event, during the event, and after the event that you
For
want to
sure.
kind of have taken care of. And the other part about storytelling during the event is I feel like making sure that your audience there is walking away with that correct messaging, or at least that call to action. You know what I mean?
And Laura, I'll just add one thing. I think we'll get into this as you can flip to the next slide too, but we'll get into, I think that's a great point of that. For me, events don't end when you walk out the door on the end of the day. And we can talk about this in the kind of steps to planning an event, but thinking about, hopefully these events are a launch point for something even bigger and for continued momentum. And I we'll get into that kind of in the next couple questions, but I do think about, what's the life beyond the event and what is that long-term story that you want to tell and that you want your participants to leave telling as well too.
Exactly.
So thanks for them.
Exactly. Yeah, so now we're getting into more of the nitty-gritty part of planning, which may not be everybody's favorite part because it can be very overwhelming. But when it comes to actually sitting down and figuring out what it takes to bring all of this together, sometimes events have catering. You need to work with the people who are bringing the food. You mentioned something about event spaces. You need to make sure you have a place to hold the event. There's a lot of different people involved in bringing an event together. So, how do you kind of manage any of these potential challenges that can arise when you're working on the logistics? And how can you kind of keep ahead of that and make sure you're getting in front of any of these issues before they happen?
Yeah, Laura, I think that's a great question, and you nicely broke down, I think, a thought process on this for me when you were mentioning just a minute ago, kind of the communication piece. I think in all of the event planning, there is that, kind of pre-event countdown, what's happening day of when things are kind of just running and you're moving through the work. And then of course, what do you do post-event? And I think looking especially at that pre-event piece, it's helpful to kind of think through, what is the date? When is your event going to happen? First of all, it's going to be a good starting point. And that may be dictated on your original goals as well. Do you need this to be, is this a university or school-based event? Does it have to happen during the school year? Is it something that's in the community and needs to be on a weekend when people are out of school or out of work? So thinking through, kind of your big picture goal, your audience, so who are the people that you want to reach, and that can help dictate where you need to hold the event, what time of day, those types of things. So kind of audience, date and time, and then you're starting to kind of build out, what are your action steps for bringing this to life. And I would say, I think one of the biggest challenges, especially if you're doing an event for the first time, especially as a young person who you're balancing maybe school schedules or work schedules or other things in your life, to just first of all give yourself enough time, to be reasonable. And I think we've seen this over the years that I've worked with students on our youth ocean conservation summits. Is the first time they do it and plan an event in their community, we tell them maybe give yourself 6 months to plan this event out. Give yourself enough time and to work backwards to build that plan. And if you come back and do it again next year, it might take less time because you've got some of the work already done. You've got some things that you can replicate or build on from previous years. But making sure you kind of build in enough time, think about that event date, and then work your way backwards and say, okay, if I want to, do I need registration for my event? Do I need people to sign up on an online form? When does that need to go out in the world? When do we need to start talking about these things? And so it's going to vary depending on the event, but I think starting with that audience and date and then working backwards can be a helpful way to organize your planning process. And then kind of to think about both the challenges and then working with a team. I think early on, as you think through your goals, it's helpful to think about dividing up some of those action items a little bit. Who can help you with different pieces? So, do you have a couple of your peers who are focused on promotion of the event and social media and registration recruitment? Do you have someone else who's focused on recruiting speakers for the event? And again, this is going to vary depending on your type of event, but I think dividing up those action steps and making it really clear who's responsible and kind of owning each of those will help you share the workload and then also make it a little bit smoother when it comes to reaching out to partners or inviting speakers. There'll kind of be a point person that can help lead that effort for your team.
Very much so. Yeah. And I definitely agree that, you know, taking a big step back, looking at all of the things that you need to do and working your way backwards is probably the best way to go about planning an event. And that includes putting together your team. We usually have a question in here about what kinds of qualities and characteristics of your team you should be looking for in this session. So I do kind of want to ask that as well. Like, what are some of the ways that you can really build a strong and effective team? Like, who are you looking towards, and where are you finding the people to bring this event together? Because the other thing is, young people who are hosting an event for the first time, this may not just be their first time hosting an event, it may also be their first time managing a team. So there's a lot going
Sure.
in here as well.
Yeah, Laura, I love that. And so important too. I think, and again, I'm giving some general answers, so excited to also hear from you as you get into questions, but also love to hear if there are specific events you are working on or trying to plan or have in your mind too, because we can also cater, kind of tailor some of these answers depending on your needs. But I think big picture, it goes back to, thinking about one, the type of event and the goal. So if you are, we've done some really cool work with young people who've led these community mural painting events around marine protected areas and ocean conservation issues. I'll be the first to tell you, if I'm planning that event, I am not an artist. So I need someone on my team who can design a mural and get it on a wall and paint it. So thinking about the skill sets that you need, depending on your event type, I think is really important. It's also important to think about on your team, are there people who bring together community partners or connections that maybe you don't have as an individual? And I think where I've seen that come to life, we've worked with incredible young people on campaigns that kind of take place in school campuses and on multiple campuses. And they've done a great job of reaching out and saying, okay, I've got this great idea. I want to build support for an ocean conservation cause or issue, but I want to do it at multiple schools. So I need to recruit a point person at each of those schools across my region that can be kind of the on the ground person who can lead this in that school body. So I think a little bit's going to be dictated by the needs of your campaign, but really thinking about, one, what are the skills that people need to bring in order to be effective in accomplishing your goal? And then also, what are those unique community connections that people bring to either partners or their peers that they can help expand the reach of your work as well?
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I 100% agree. And we'll talk about, reaching out to community partners on the
Yeah.
next slide as well. But yeah, just really looking at, your immediate network, whose
Yeah.
skills can you leverage to the best of your ability? And I mentioned something about managing earlier. And I also think that, if you are a little apprehensive or nervous about managing a team for the first time, that's also somebody that you can, bring in and help you out with, is having somebody who has experience managing a big team like that. And now the last thing before we get to the next slide as well, I also wanted to touch on something that Sean, you mentioned before, is time as a resource. This is
Mm.
something that is very, very important, I think, in planning an event, because, we've talked a lot about the different aspects of creating a social media campaign, hosting an event, what it means to, bring the ocean and climate together throughout all of these sessions. But all of this requires time. And, we're going to talk about resources on the next slide, how to fundraise and secure funding sources for your event. But we also really need to think about time as a resource as well, because as Sean mentioned, it can take a lot of time to put stuff like
Great.
this.
And Laura, I'll have one comment too, to your point about managing a team for the first time. We talk a lot about building out your team of your peers or other young people to help support this work, but also kind of in the same lines of building those community partnerships. Think about who are those mentors that can support you in this work too. It doesn't always just have to be your peers helping lead this work. I think for me, starting some of these events as a young person, I was incredibly grateful to be able to reach out to people that I had known for years, people who were who taught me summer camp at an aquarium when I was 9, and I still work with today. People who, had helped me, through some of the school programs or the high school internship I was in at Marine Laboratory. It's being able to go to just, even if it's a few people who can serve in that advisory role and support you and offer some additional guidance and community connections has been really helpful and continues to be helpful for me over the years. And I think a big thing that I'll say about all of this work is the importance of relationship building. And this is going to go into, I think, our next set of questions too. But as you build relationships with people through this process, whether it's your peers, whether it's mentors or partners, keep in touch with those people past the event as well too. This again, I'm going to keep coming back to the event doesn't end when you turn off the lights and you leave the room or whatever that looks like. At the end of the day, it's something that you can continue to build on the community that you're cultivating. And I think that's really important to stay in touch with the people that you're working with, think about how you can build on the success of a first event and where that leads from in your community as well.
Very much so. And you're absolutely right. It does lead into our next set of questions. So when we're putting together an event, right, we've talked about needing a space. We've talked about needing a team and needing, potentially catering or, materials. If, like Sean said, you're doing a mural or something like that, like there's so many different aspects that you may need to find how to pay for. So talking about getting in touch with community organizers and partners within your area, how is it possible for a young person to find funding for their event? What are the things that they should be thinking about, and how do they kind of navigate that field to decide, if they need funding, and if so, where they can get it?
Yeah, Laura, that's a great question. And I think the way you frame that's really important too. I think first and foremost, not every single event needs funding or a ton of funding to come off the ground. So I think part of that is a little bit in your event planning strategy of thinking through what are those needs. Do you need funds? What do you need those for? And that's going to be also really helpful as you make your case to potential funders or partners to have some of those specific needs outlined instead of just showing up and saying, hey, I'm planning this cool event and we need $1,000. Being able to articulate, why do you need that funding and what is it going to be used for and how will it help advance some of their priorities and goals. So I'll flag that. But also I think one of the things that's really important is, and Laura, you mentioned this in the context of time, but I'll come back to this in a couple of different instances, which when you're thinking about events, there's so many ways that community partners can contribute that isn't necessarily like writing a check for $500. There's so many kind of in-kind donations or contributions that can be supportive to this work. And I think over the years, through both my work with the Youth Ocean Conservation Summit, through some of the incredible on-the-ground youth leadership summits and events we've run at Earth Echo over the years, we're so grateful to have amazing community partners that provide their time, whether that's staffing an event and like helping run registration and checking people in at the door, or a huge one for me over the years working on events has been, as we said earlier, contributions of space. It costs money to rent a space sometimes if you were to go to an aquarium or a community center or any of those, typically any kind of space. But being able to work with some great community partners and say, hey, would you kind of donate your space for the day, your room, your classroom, whatever that looks like. And we've seen that happen with aquariums, schools, universities, being able to, on a Saturday, come in and turn on the lights and let people use a room. That's that goes a long way, especially to helping you get some of these events off the ground. So I would say think about, what are your needs and kind of outline those initially. Think about what of those, are things that you may need to actually raise some actual money for, but also what are those things that community partners could help secure. And sometimes we've seen when you're doing an event for the first time, you might be able to secure more of that kind of in-kind support or donations of time or space. And that helps you get the event off the ground. And then if you keep doing this event year after year or repeatedly, you can build from there. And now you've got something to point to and tell someone you're asking for money. Hey, look at this thing I did that was really successful. We want to do it even bigger and better next year. And we need, $2,000 to make that happen. And here's what it will support. So I think that's one way to think about it. Also, not every fundraising effort has to raise, thousands and thousands of dollars. I think providing a space for local community organizations to come in and donate smaller chunks of funding, and giving them a process to do that, I think is really powerful. So for the Youth Ocean Conservation Summits I ran throughout college, when I first put that together, we had a really low level kind of sponsorship for, I think it was $50. You could come in and as a local organization, you could sponsor the event, you could get your logo on a screen, and you could set up a table to talk about your work. And it was really cool because we've got to bring in amazing organizations who would set up a table, would meet with the young people, would talk about their great conservation work. But it also helped us raise a little bit of funding to get the ball rolling and get the event off the ground. And then again, continuing to just articulate what that funding goes to. People really, I think youth-led events are really fundable. It's something that people get excited about, and especially if you can show them, hey, our funding is going to this. It's going to sponsor 10 young people to get to participate in this experience, or it's going to support a grant to give young people resources to take action in their community. Those are the types of things that are that people get excited about funding, the direct work of young people. And I think what's also important is the follow-up after the fact. So making sure you go back to those partners and funders, obviously thank them, but show them where that funding went, show them pictures of the event, give them tools to talk about your work too, which is another way to think about this over the long term. It's really great when you can give a partner or a funder some pictures of a successful event or a social media post that's easy for them to copy paste and post on their accounts. That draws more attention to the work you're doing, and it also gives them a chance to really highlight and celebrate the great work that they're supporting too. So hopefully it's a win-win for everybody as well. So I would say, start with those, and last thing I guess on this would be start with the people too. You could go to individuals and ask for a donation. You could go to those couple of early partners that may be involved in your event, or you can ask other people on your team for their suggestions of who to reach out to. So start with people start with the organizations that you may already have a connection with, build that momentum, and then you can build and grow from there as well.
Very much so. And I think there's a couple things here that you touched on that I want to emphasize. I think number one, the elevator pitch, right? If you don't know what an elevator pitch is, it's basically, think about you're getting in an elevator with somebody, you have like 30 seconds to talk to them before the door opens and they get out of the elevator. So you want to have a really good, quick couple sentences when you're going to somebody who you might want to have sponsor fund your event, and just show them in plain words how their money is going to be used. Just like you said, Sean, like they really want to know where that money is going. And on that note, also, like you said, is that the youth voice is very, very, very powerful, and youth events are very fundable. For session 4 next week, campaign organizing, one of the questions that we always get in the Q&A session for that one is like, along the lines of, as a young person, how do I get people in charge to kind of pay attention to me and listen to what we have to say? And this is one of those key moments that you can kind of use your age and your collective youth power to your advantage, because it's kind of, less so nowadays. I feel like young people are just really, always at the forefront of societal change and really pushing for the bright future that we need. But young people really are able to get into these spaces and how am I trying to say this? Basically, you can leverage your youth voice when talking to funders. And, it's kind of rare to see a young person really step up and say, hey, these are the things that we need, and here's how you can help. And you can really, going back to the storytelling question, that's another place where you can kind of really get in there and work with these community partners. Now, the other thing that you touched on, Sean, well, first of all, saying thank you, that's another really big thing. But you said also starting with the people that you know, right? You also said that you don't necessarily have to raise thousands and thousands of dollars for an event. And, starting with these community partners, you usually have a pretty good idea of, what businesses are going to be more likely to donate a space or funds or, food, other resources. But there are also, sometimes corporate partnerships that you can go to. And, it's not necessarily like a local boutique mom and pop shop that you're going to. It could be like a big national or international chain business or whatever. And sometimes when you're going after those bigger businesses, there can be some kind of unfortunate ethical things that might not really make you want to even take their money. We do always get a lot of questions about greenwashing in this situation. So Sean, I guess as a young person who is organizing an event, how do you kind of manage those ethical considerations? And, even if you need funding for something, how do you kind of weigh that against like, oh, I don't want to partner with them because I don't like their business practices?
Yeah, Laura, it's a great question. I'm gonna have one last thing and then jump into that, which is I think we talk about being prepared and being able to communicate your work in a way that could be shared with the funder. Also recognize though that these funding relationships sometimes, and I know we said this a little bit earlier, they take time. And sometimes it's about building a longer term relationship that you get to know the person. They get to know you as someone who is an incredible champion in the community doing great work. And it may not be that they give you a donation or support your work in year one, but maybe there's a space um, to invite them to your event. Can they come as a speaker or a guest or just hang out in the audience and be a participant and see the work firsthand? And then maybe it's the next year that there's an opportunity to get a little bit of funding or support from them. So do think about these things as a little bit of a long-term relationship building piece as well too. And then to your other question, which we have here, appreciate it so much. I think one of the things that's important to me in event planning is to think just strategically about bringing, especially in the environmental conservation space, and doing this in a way, of course, that is ethical, and that's something that I would challenge you all to think about with your team and your partners too. That's something that's a great conversation to have with the young people who are working with you on an event. It's something that, with your mentors and advisors, to navigate that and kind of set those guidelines for your work and yourself, depending on the goals and outcomes for your event. But the one big thing I would say is I think when it's working with businesses or any organizations for support is I would challenge you all to think about how can you bring in non-traditional partners to this work? And I think, I would always encourage people to have those conversations, to have conversations with a funder, a partner that you may not think is the right fit for your event, but if they're interested in talking about getting involved or working together, to sit down and have a conversation about it. And I think that's a great place to start because so often the environmental world gets a little bit siloed and it's a small, we talk about it. I'm looking at the attendees. I see some familiar names and faces in here. We're sometimes a little bit insular, and it's helpful to think about, how do we leverage some non-traditional partnerships or sponsorships or support, whatever that looks like, not just for fundraising, but across the board with the event. How do we bring in non-traditional speakers? How do we bring in groups that aren't always in these circles? Because we know that if we're going to tackle these big picture ocean and climate challenges, we need everyone at the table and everyone in these conversations. And that's going to look a little bit different depending on your event. But that's something that I would encourage you to have those conversations and think about unique ways to bring people in to these ocean and climate events that wouldn't traditionally be represented there, and to see how you can also work together towards some non-traditional solutions as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, one example that I have personal experience with is working with one of our friends, Big Blue and You, which is a wonderful organization in South Florida. And for one of their annual events, one year we partnered with a local restaurant. And it wasn't even that they were catering, it was just that they were, helping support with funds. And that restaurant, it opens up a conversation for, is your seafood sustainable? Is your seafood coming from, a well-managed fishery? And, are you using a lot of plastic in your restaurants? Like, it can kind of open up some other conversations that again can lead into that extended, furthered impact with the event itself, but also after the fact as well. Yeah, and we also have two questions or two comments in here talking about greenwashing. And yeah, I mean, it's always tricky, when you see that different businesses have, different ways about going and doing their business practices that may not sit right with you. And I think, Sean, what you said is talking about that with your partners and especially your mentors who may know the ins and outs of that conversation a little bit better is also a really good place to start to have that conversation. And yeah, it's definitely an increasingly important conversation to have. And I really appreciate that young people, every time we have youth advocacy training, there's always questions about greenwashing. And I just think it's so important that, this is continuously and more being brought into the spotlight because it is a serious concern.
Yeah, I just want to say I love the way you gave that example too, because I think certainly you can have these conversations in the context of your event and the context of bringing more people to the table in this work, but also it's a really interesting opportunity to talk to groups like that about their business practice and work outside of the context of this event entirely, and it could just open up additional conversations and bring youth voices into some new spaces where they haven't been traditionally. So I would say, use that to your advantage, especially again, think back to what is your goal for this event and what is the cause you're trying to uplift, and how can these conversations, these longer term relationships, not only tie into your event themselves, but also open doors for you to have conversations with people about their business practices or their work or whatever that looks like in the community too. So I really appreciate that example
Yeah.
in the comments as well. Thanks for them.
Yeah, and I think this actually leads us really well into our last set of questions here before we get into the Q&A as well, because, we've talked a lot about measuring the impact after the fact and, thinking about all of these different ways. We've mentioned non-traditional stakeholders, so I also kind of want to go over what that might mean. Like to me, a non-traditional stakeholder could be like a public library. They're what we consider, at least in the United States, we use the term a third space. It's a place for people to congregate where they don't necessarily have to spend money. And those kinds of third spaces are increasingly rare nowadays, but that is kind of a non-traditional stakeholder. You can also think about schools and universities and different types of businesses and stuff. So, measuring your impact can mean a lot of different things in terms of partnerships, but again, it can also mean a lot of different things in terms of the impact it has on your participants and the ripple effect. What your participants learn at your event can spread throughout the community in a lot of different ways as well. So how do you actually measure that? Like, are there any specific methods or tools that you can use to evaluate that? Whether it's the direct participants themselves or the community on a broader scale?
Yeah, it's a great question and such an important one too. I think, it goes back to that conversation around what are your goals, right? Your goal isn't necessarily just to have an event, like that's great, but how are we measuring, did the event help you reach your broader goals? And again, I say that in kind of a broad strokes, big picture, but again, if we go back to that example I mentioned earlier, if you were planning a voter registration drive, right? You did your event, how will you know that you were successful? Maybe you can track the number of people who registered to vote. Maybe you're doing an educational event in your community and you want to survey people before they come to the event and ask them just a few simple questions about what they know about ocean-based climate solutions or plastic pollution or whatever that topic is. And then, after they go through your educational content, can you ask them those same questions? Another thing that we'll often do is, see people, either take a video or share a pledge or something that captures not only their knowledge gain, but also their behavior change. And I think that's really important when we think about the long-term impacts of these events is, how are we helping to shift people toward a more, you know, ocean-friendly life choices, climate-friendly life choices, behavior change, whether they are going to vote with the climate in mind or make purchases with the ocean and climate in mind. So I think it's going to vary a little bit. And again, if people have specific events, we can chat through, like if you have a type of event you're working on, we can talk about how to evaluate the success of that. But I also think it's really cool, the lessons learned piece is a big one. For me, I think a lot of the events that I see young people do are really powerful in this space. And I also think they're things that can often be replicated in other communities. So I would challenge you all when you're doing this, both for yourself and for your peers, to document the process. It's great to always highlight like the social media pictures at the end of the event and all the young people are there and it's powerful and impactful, but document the planning process. Take notes on what your timeline looks like, what your action steps are, all the things that Laura just asked me, like ask yourself those questions because as you go through the process, you'll be able to jot down like, hey, this worked well. Hey, this didn't go so well. Here's where I can improve in the future. And that's so important for you, especially if you want to build on this event in the future. But I also think it's something that when you have a successful event or campaign or anything you're driving in your community, as a young person, you have a unique ability to kind of package that up in a way that others can do that in their community. So for instance, that's something that I did over the years with our Youth Ocean Conservation Summits. We saw so much interest in young people coming to a single event that was in South Florida, and not everyone could get to South Florida. And so we took the lessons learned and tools, put it into a guide and said, here you go, take this to, the other side of the country, take this to different communities and cities and plan your own version, make it your own. But here's the tools and resources to make that happen. And I think that's been really powerful to see that reflected in so many of the campaigns and projects and events that I work on with young people. And I would challenge you again, if you come up with something that goes well and works well, think about how you can package that up and share it with groups like the Ocean Project and Earth Echo, and groups that we're happy to help share those with other networks of young people who can help pick those up and run with them in their community as well.
Definitely. And I think that the documentation of the process is really, really important, because you can also, that it helps you pinpoint very specific variables that you can either keep the same or change. Does your event focus on one specific issue? Did the event work really well and you want to apply it to a different issue? That could work. Did your event work really well on a local scale? And do you want to change it to, like you were saying, Sean, a national scale, and allow other folks all around your region, or potentially other countries as well?
Yeah.
Can you apply that on a larger scale? And then, yeah, there's just so many different little variables that you might not be thinking about if you don't have that process written down. I do see we have a couple of questions in the Q&A that I want to get to, and one of them does ask specifically about resources. So talking about that, what these, this documentation process looks like, that's a really helpful way to kind of create those kinds of resources for other people and for yourselves as well. Sean, I'll let you add to that if you have anything, and then we can move on to the actual Q&A.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, is when it comes to examples and resources, I would kick that to this. I mean, I see an incredible group of young people. We can certainly share tools and resources after this call, but also I see an incredible group of young people on this conversation. And so would encourage you all to continue to connect with each other after these events, to share again what has worked in your community, what are those lessons learned. And that's something that can be really powerful. Like you said, Laura, even if it's, you can apply lessons from one event to a completely different type of event. And there's some great opportunities for idea exchanging there. So I'd say, stay in touch with this group as well too, to continue those conversations.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. Thanks, Sean. So now we have time for Q&A, and I really appreciate you guys having some questions in here already. There is one for you, Sean, specifically as a youth advocate and event organizer. How can you address the issues of climate change and waste management? How do you contribute positively to global warming? So I think this question is asking, like, how do you manage like the actual carbon footprint of your event and the waste of the event itself? If I'm wrong, you can correct me in the chat, but I think that that's what that question is asking.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks for the question too. It's such a great one. I think it is going to depend a lot on what your event looks like. We're doing an event right now, which is on Zoom, and we're all kind of sitting in our respective places and joining virtually. So I think it's going to vary a lot depending on your event type. But I would say, especially, again, every event's going to be a little different. But if you're looking to cut down on some of kind of the travel and carbon footprint associated with in-person events, you can always think about events happening in a place where there's audience already coming together. And I think one thing that, in working with young people at Earth Echo for a number of years, we've led events with students on water ecosystems and water quality around big events like World Water Day and World Water Monitoring Day. And one of the things that we've said is, sometimes it takes a lot of work to bring in a whole new audience for an event. So think strategically about where are people already gathering. And the go-to is sometimes schools, universities. How can you do an event at your school's assembly? How can you do something where if people are there, they're going to be there anyway? It also helps you build a really big audience potentially for your events. So I'd say that's a great thing to think about is, how can you engage in spaces where there's already people there? And, it gives you that great baseline. You have less of that need to kind of travel in or bring people in. And then I think just thinking throughout the sustainability that we've done over the years with in-person events I've run, we've worked to set up water bottle refill stations and had people bring their own water bottles. We've worked to, cut back on obviously plastics and things like that in lunches or, meals that are served at the event. Or we've worked with groups like TerraCycle to have a recycle bin to recycle, if there was a chip wrapper or something. That's a little bit on the smaller scale, but I think it's something that's really important to think about. And again, that's going to look a little different depending on your type of event. But just I think that's really one of those important kind of principles and pillars to think about when you first start planning the event is, and kind of build that in throughout your planning process as well. And thanks just for, the commitment and focus on that too.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that's a really important aspect of event planning that sometimes is overlooked, but in this space specifically, I think it is very important. Now there are two questions here that are kind of similar. So the first one is, what do you think is the best form of event or tools to get people who are not familiar with ocean issues interested in them? And then the other question is, what first step might a young person take towards attracting attention to the ocean climate awareness? So I think basically the idea is, are there any specific strategies or types of events that are really effective in, kind of an introductory level of getting people aware in the general ocean climate awareness? I think that kind of encompasses both of those questions.
Yeah, Laura, I love that. Thank you both for the questions too. And I would challenge, I don't know if we can do this, but I would challenge folks in the chat too. I'd love to hear, like, almost crowdsource this question too. If there are people in the audience who have had success with teaching with an event or something in the community that have, has taught others about ocean and climate issues, would love, drop a sentence or something in the chat about the event. Would love to hear what others have done, because everyone's got different, slightly different answers to this. I think ultimately it's helpful to think about kind of what that audience is. We've seen young people do a lot of fantastic um, school-based events and education programs, again, where they have that captive audience already there. And also it's exciting to think about if your audience for ocean and climate education, say they are your peers or younger students that you're mentoring, it's also exciting to think about the influence they have on their friends, their family when they go back home. And so we've been in the midst of onboarding some new youth leaders in our ambassador programs at Earth Echo right now. And one of the things that we've been talking about is how they can reach directly students and their peers, but how in turn those young people can go back to their parents and bring that message back to their, an older generation or an intergenerational audience. So that's one thing to think about as how you can reach different audiences. The other thing I would say is, oftentimes we think about education and awareness leading to more action and leading to people to take action in the community. And one of the things that we say a lot about at Earth Echo is that, that action is often what leads to awareness. So if you can get people out in the community doing something that's hands-on and really connects them to these issues, and that could be any multitude of things. It could be, starting with a coastal cleanup program, but then leveraging that audience that you bring out for a day to talk about some of these bigger picture issues. Or it could be, inviting people out to do a community restoration project and seeing the impact of these issues firsthand. Typically, one, it's educational in and of itself, but it also often motivates people to take further action, and it brings the community together around those issues. So I would say think about, what are those things that you can get people out that are hands-on and tangible. And also say, think about ways to make this work fun. Sometimes we lose that a little bit in this space, when it's focused really heavily, as it should be, on the issues and the challenges and the solutions. But if we can think about, what are those fun community events that can you host a block party that gets people excited about ocean conservation and brings in, again, those non-traditional audiences that typically wouldn't show up maybe to a beach cleanup or a coastal planning project, but wants to come and hang out with members of their community and eat some good food, I don't know, and hang out and have a good time, and also weaving in these messages around ocean and climate as well. So I would challenge you to think about how to make these fun and engaging and kind of, again, non-traditional in that sense.
Definitely. And I think that really, it kind of ties into what we were talking about storytelling before, right? The message that you want your participants to walk
Yeah.
away from the event with. And it's easier, I would say, for them to have that action kind of like implanted in the back of their mind when the event that they were at was really fun, really memorable. So I definitely agree, Sean. Now let's see. Okay, we have a couple questions about fundraising. Again, how do we fundraise specifically for an event? We talked a little bit about that earlier. We also have from Michael to add on to the greenwashing, given that most companies now are less willing to disclose and resorting to some form of greenwashing. How can companies and individuals have safe psychological safety to be transparent in their practices? So I think what this question is getting at is, how do you make sure you have peace of mind? Like, what are the kind of steps that you can go through, sorry, to make sure that the businesses, companies that you're partnering with actually do have like genuinely sustainable practices?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one is it's still certainly starting with those conversations, having conversations with those companies as partners. Recognize that in every case, that is not going to necessarily give you the answer that you're looking for or the detailed responses that you're looking for. Also, a lot of times companies will publish, reports and details on their impact and sustainability on their website. Again, I see in the question, that's not always going to be the most transparent process. And so the thing that I would say that's beyond event planning for me a little bit is one of the things that I think is really cool having worked with corporate partners and corporations is young people are the ones demanding that companies be more transparent in that space. And they're also doing it in the space of, again, setting aside event planning. Consistently, research is showing that young people are demanding that if they're going to go work for a company, they need to be really transparent in those sustainable practices. And young people are looking for companies that have programs for their employees to give back and engage in environmental and sustainability work. They're looking for employees that or employers that offer those opportunities for them to have an impact, a social impact, a community impact in their work. And so, no matter how they're getting there, we're seeing, I think, companies continue to hear that pressure from young people is we're not going to come work for you as an employee if those things aren't offered to us as a team member, and also if you're not having that larger impact in the community. And I think one of the things that's been really rewarding for me in my work, specifically at Earth Echo, is the chance to work with corporate partners and funders on some of our programs that it's not just about their commitment to the environmental cause that they're supporting this work. They also have their employees go out and we have an incredible partners that support our Earth Echo Water Challenge program, for instance, that not only support the program financially and with their partnership, but also their employees go out and teach fifth graders how to test water in their community and connect to water ecosystems. And seeing that really the investment of those team members and those partners has been so rewarding. And to also see companies that give their employees the time and space to do that kind of work has been really rewarding. So grateful to the incredible partners that we work with, but also encourage you all to, as you move through your careers, no matter who you're working for, continue to push for that, push for those opportunities to have an impact in sustainability as well too. So thanks for that question and just the attention to it.
Very much so. Now we also have a question asking a couple more resources here. So I'm just grabbing our websites that will
Thanks,
be
Laura, on the link.
helpful. There we go. There's the last one. So yeah, let me just go through these one more time to make sure we touched on everything. Yeah, so a sample of a great proposal or project. The websites that I just sent in the chat, the Earth Echo website, the Youth Ocean Conservation website, and the World Ocean Day website, we all have so many different resources that you can go and learn from. And I mean, I can't even bring to mind any specific other ones because I just know that there are so many out there. You just have to look. And again, as is the case for every single session in youth advocacy training, all of the things that we're talking about, Sean and myself are both from the United States, but everything that we're talking about is applicable in every country in the world. You can still go to your local community members and talk to them and figure out what works best for you and your community. And different events might work different in different areas, and different approaches might work better for certain things. But yeah, I think just being adaptable and making sure that you have your support system is really, really important. I think that's kind of a good place to close. I think that helps kind of take all of these last three questions in the Q&A. Yeah, Sean, do you have anything else to add before we?
I just want to say how much I appreciate this conversation and just the intentionality around these questions. So the questions that you all are asking are so, I think are such great kind of principles and values to weave into your event planning process, and encourage you also to reach out to all of us too. I think we've dropped links in the chat too. But we're also happy to be those. We talked about making partners. You're on a call with at least two organizations, probably more in the chat represented by the young people here. So reach out to people you're here with, reach out to us, let us know how we can be supportive. I'll drop one more link in the chat just as for our Gen Z community platform at Earth Echo. That's a space for organizing among young people where you'll see young people sharing events and things that they're putting together in their community for action, and learn from each other. I think that's something that's a kind of final takeaway for me is I've been doing this work for over a decade at least, probably even kind of longer when I was doing some work as a student, and we're constantly learning and growing in the space. So I appreciate so much your questions. And every time I plan an event, I learn something new, and I think that's important to continue to reflect on and grow and learn through that process. And just can't wait to see the events and campaigns that you all will lead in your community, and know that we're here to help any way that we can.
Very much so. Thank you, Sean. Very well said. So quick announcements before we let you all go. Again, session 4 next Saturday, same time, same place. I can't believe this program is already almost over. I'm very excited. We have some great speakers coming up. We have some folks from Youth for MPAs from South Africa who are going to be joining us, which is really exciting. Potentially some folks from Sustainable Ocean Alliance as well. Really hoping we have a great conversation next Saturday. And then again, just a reminder on the 2024 World Ocean Day action theme, catalyzing action for the ocean and climate, which is kind of the whole conversation that we've been having throughout this program. We have our 12 months of action. Every single month, we have a dedicated focus of conservation action. And for April, we're looking at Earth Day. We're looking at plastic pollution. The Earth Day theme, I believe this year, is plastics, and we're just looking to create some action around ratifying the Global Ocean Plastics Treaty, which is really exciting. So keep an eye out on the World Ocean Day website for some more resources about that. And then as well, I've also gotten a couple questions to my email about certificates of completion for this program. So again, as a reminder, I kind of talked about this a little bit last week, but next week at the end of session 4, I will be sending out a link to a feedback survey. If you are able to submit a completed feedback form by the deadline that I will give you next week, you will be able to receive a certificate of completion for the program. So if anybody has any questions for me, definitely send me an email at ljohnson@theoceanproject.org. But if not, I do just want to say another huge thank you to Sean. It was lovely talking to you as always. I'm really excited to continue our collaboration. And yeah, just thanks everybody for watching, and lovely conversation, Sean. Thank you so much.
Right back at you, Laura. Thanks as always. Such a pleasure. And thanks everybody. I see the comments in the chat. So grateful to see you all joining this conversation, and can't wait to see what comes out of these discussions. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys. And we will see you next Saturday. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening, morning, afternoon, wherever in the world you may be. Have a great one.
Thanks, everybody.